The bedroom was too still. Adrienne Marsh stood in the doorway at 6:14 in the morning, still in her coat, her keys digging into her palm. The bed was made. It had been made the same way she'd made it 3 days ago, because her husband hadn't slept in it. Not once. Not since she'd stopped pretending not to notice. She set her keys on the dresser, sat on the edge of the mattress, and stared at the wall. There was a framed photo above the nightstand. The two of them in Charleston, 4 years ago, the summer before everything got complicated. She remembered the exact moment. They had just gotten off a harbor boat tour. She was laughing at something he said. She couldn't remember what anymore. She tried sitting there and she couldn't. That was the thing about the end of a marriage. It wasn't one moment. It was 1,000 small erasures, each one so quiet. You didn't even feel it happening until one morning you're sitting in your coat at 6 in the morning, trying to remember the last time your husband made you laugh, and you come up empty. Adrienne was 38 years old. She was the senior compliance officer at a mid-sized financial consulting firm in Atlanta, which meant she spent most of her professional life finding the small, deliberate things people tried to hide. Discrepancies, omissions. The thing that didn't quite add up. She was very good at her job. She had been choosing not to be good at it at home. Her husband, Carter Marsh, was a real estate developer. He had built 3 mixed-use properties in the last 6 years. Had a gift for walking into a distressed building and seeing what it could become. That was what had drawn her to him, the way he looked at broken things with optimism instead of pity. She'd thought, at the time, that he looked at her the same way. She wasn't sure when that changed. She wasn't sure it had changed so much as simply ended. Carter had been coming home late for 8 months. First it was the Buckhead development, which was genuinely demanding and gave him a reasonable excuse. Then it was the new property in Midtown, which also gave him a reasonable excuse. Then somewhere around month 6, the excuses stopped being reasonable and started being the kind of thing you said to someone when you'd stopped believing they'd ask follow-up questions. She had stopped asking follow-up questions. She told herself it was grace. She told herself she was giving him room. She told herself a lot of things in the dark that she didn't entirely believe by morning. The coat was still on. She finally stood and hung it on the back of the chair, walked to the kitchen, made coffee she didn't want. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Carter. Won't be back tonight either. Permits issue on the Decatur site. Don't wait up. She read it twice, set the phone down, picked it up again. Okay, she typed back. Not okay, I hope it goes well. Not okay. I miss you. Just okay. Because that was all she had left. She drank the coffee, she went to work. The thing about working in compliance is that you develop a particular relationship with documentation. You learn that the truth is almost never in what people say. It's in what they don't say, in the gaps between records, in the date stamps and the deleted files, and the receipts that end up in the wrong folder. She hadn't meant to find it. That was the honest version. She hadn't gone looking. She'd been using Carter's laptop to print boarding passes. Her printer was broken, his was right there. And she'd opened the Documents folder and seen a file named Decatur Phase 2, Permit, Timeline, and clicked it because she was a compliance officer, and habit is habit. It wasn't a permit timeline. It was a lease agreement, a residential lease, a 2-bedroom apartment in Inman Park, in Carter's name and one other. A woman named Petra Langford, signed 8 months ago. First month's rent paid the same week, he told Adrienne. The Buckhead project was bleeding him dry, and they should cut back on date nights for a while. She sat at his desk for a long time. There was a spreadsheet open behind the lease. She clicked to it without meaning to. It was a budget breakdown, shared expenses, groceries, utilities, furniture, itemized. Carter had always been meticulous with money. He'd been building a whole second household, line by line, with the same methodical care he used on his development projects. She closed the laptop. She drove to work. She sat through a 2-hour compliance review meeting and said everything she was supposed to say, and took notes and nodded, and no one in that conference room could tell that her entire body felt like it had been turned inside out. That was the first day. She didn't say anything to him for 3 weeks. That wasn't weakness. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself, because there was a version of her that might have believed it was weakness. It wasn't. It was the compliance officer in her, the part that had learned a long time ago that you never confront someone with incomplete information. You gather. You make sure that when you move, you have everything you need. She opened her own accounts. She had always had her own accounts. She'd insisted on it when they got married. Not because she'd expected this, but because she was the kind of woman who believed in structural independence. What she did now was quietly shift the direct deposit on her second account, the one Carter didn't know the full balance of. She moved it to a bank where they had no shared history. She called her sister Renee, who lived in Savannah and had always had a particular clarity about Carter that Adrian had spent years dismissing as jealousy. "I found something," Adrian said. Renee didn't say, "I told you." She said, "What do you need?" That mattered more than Adrian could say at the time. She also called an attorney, a woman named Frances Doherty, who had an office in Buckhead and a reputation for being the kind of lawyer men dreaded. Adrian had known about Frances for years. She came up in conversations at the firm sometimes, when female colleagues were going through things. She'd filed away the name with the hope she'd never need it. Frances's assistant gave her an appointment for the following Thursday. In the meantime, Adrian did what she had been trained to do. She documented everything. The lease. The budget spreadsheet. She photographed it on his laptop before closing it. His phone, which he'd left on the kitchen counter one morning while he showered, she didn't go through his messages. She didn't need to. She just noted the contact name that kept appearing at the top of his screen. Petra. Just Petra. No last name. No emoji, no nickname. The kind of contact label that was meant to look like nothing. She also noted that their joint savings account had seen 4 significant withdrawals in the last 6 months that didn't appear on any of their shared household records. She cross-referenced the dates against his stated schedule. 2 of them fell on weekends he had claimed to be at site visits. She had always been good at her job. Carter came home on a Wednesday, an actual Wednesday, in the evening, while she was making dinner. He walked in like everything was normal, dropped his keys on the hook by the door. Said he was starving. Said whatever she was making smelled good. "It's just pasta," she said. He sat at the kitchen island and scrolled his phone while she finished cooking. She watched him from the corner of her eye. The way he held the phone slightly angled away from her, the small, practiced adjustment of a man who had been doing this long enough that it had become automatic. She set the bowl in front of him. "Long week?" she asked. "Brutal," he said. "The Decatur permits are a disaster. I'm probably going to need to push back the whole Phase 2 timeline." She nodded. "The Decatur site," she said. "That's the one on Fayetteville Road?" "Right, I thought Phase 2 wasn't until Q1. He looked up just briefly. "It wasn't. Timeline shifted, ah." She sat across from him, ate a few bites. "I saw your architect at the Publix on Ponce last weekend, by the way. Derek," he said. "Hi." None of this was true, but it didn't matter. She was watching his face. His expression did something complicated in the space of about 2 seconds, a flicker of calculation, then a return to neutral. "Yeah, Derek's been out of the loop on this one," he said easily. "We've been using a different firm for Phase 2. He was a good liar. She'd give him that." She smiled. "Makes sense," she said, and poured herself more water. After dinner, he said he had calls to make. He took his phone to the back porch. She could see him through the glass door, pacing, one hand in his jacket pocket. She watched him for a moment. Then she washed the dishes and went to bed. She lay in the dark and thought about the version of herself from 5 years ago, standing on a harbor boat in Charleston, laughing at something she no longer remembered. She thought about how that woman would feel right now, in this bed, in this silence. Then she stopped thinking about that version of herself. It didn't help. The meeting with Frances Doherty lasted 2 hours. Frances was in her late 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of unimpressed energy that Adrian immediately respected. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and took notes by hand in a narrow, precise script that somehow communicated that she had heard every version of this story before and was entirely unbothered. Adrian laid out everything she had: the lease, the photographs of the spreadsheet, the bank withdrawals and their dates, the contact labeled Petra, the timeline, the months of coordinated absence. Frances listened without interrupting. When Adrian finished, she capped her pen and folded her hands on the legal pad. "You've done a significant amount of my preliminary work for me," she said. "That's unusual." "I work in compliance," Adrian said. "I know. I looked you up." Frances allowed herself a small smile. Okay, here's what you need to understand. Georgia is an equitable distribution state, which does not mean equal distribution. It means what's fair considering the length of the marriage, each party's financial contributions, and a handful of other factors. The joint accounts, the shared property, the business holdings. All of that is on the table. What I need from you is access to 6 years of joint financial records. I already have them, Adrian said. She put a USB drive on the desk. Frances looked at the drive, then back at Adrian. Like I said, unusual. They talked for another 40 minutes about strategy, about timing, about the house in Cascade Heights that they'd bought together 3 years ago, and what it was likely to appraise for. Carter had always handled the property side of things. He was the one with the contacts, the one who understood market cycles. Adrian had let him. She understood now that this had been her most significant oversight. One more thing, Adrian said before she stood to leave. He doesn't know I know any of this. Frances studied her. You intend to keep it that way? Until I have everything in place. She picked up her bag. I'm not confronting him with incomplete information. Frances removed her reading glasses and set them on the desk. I've been doing this for 22 years, she said, and I can count on one hand the number of clients who walked in this prepared. She paused. Don't let him see you're prepared. Men like this, when they realize what's happening, the first thing they do is try to move money. I know, Adrian said. I froze the accounts I had access to this morning. She didn't say it with any particular satisfaction. It was just a fact. It was the next step, and she had taken it. Carter found out it was happening not from her, but from his bank. She had spoken with Frances, who had filed the initial paperwork on a Friday. By Monday, certain automatic financial protections had kicked in that prevented either party from liquidating shared assets without court approval. Carter received a letter. He came home early. She was at the kitchen table with her laptop when she heard the front door. What the hell is this? He said. He was holding the letter. His voice was the particular register of a man who had assumed he had more time. She looked up from her laptop. She felt her heart rate tick up slightly, the way it always did in moments that mattered. Then it steadied. You've been served, she said. I filed on Friday. He stared at her. You filed for divorce? Yes, without saying anything to me. You've been with Petra Langford for 8 months, she said. You signed a lease with her the same week you told me money was tight. You've transferred funds from our joint account on at least 4 documented occasions to cover shared living expenses at the Inman Park apartment. She said it calmly, the way she'd say it in a deposition. You had 8 months to say something to me. I had 3 weeks to put my documentation in order. He was quiet for a long moment. How did you? He stopped. You left your laptop on the desk, she said. I needed to print boarding passes. Something shifted in his face. The calculation that had always been there, but that he'd kept below the surface, it came up now. She could see it working. Look, he said. His voice dropped, softer now. This is Adrian. I know how this looks. Can we just... No, she said. I'm not. I just want to talk about this. My attorney is Frances Doherty, she said. You should retain someone good. I mean that genuinely, Carter. Retain someone good, because this process is going to be cleaner if both sides are professionally represented. He left, drove away. She heard the car back out of the driveway. She sat at the table for a moment. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something. The late afternoon light was coming through the kitchen window at a low angle, the kind of light that made everything look softer than it was. She closed her laptop and called Renee. It's done, she said. How are you? She thought about that. Tired, she said. But okay. Do you want me to come up? Yeah, she said. Actually, yeah. Come up this weekend. The weeks that followed were not easy, and she wouldn't have said they were. There were nights she sat on the back porch after work and felt something she couldn't fully name. Not grief for Carter, exactly, but grief for the version of her life she had believed was possible. The one where the man looked at broken things with optimism. The one where she had been one of those things he was looking at. She let herself feel it. She'd read enough armchair psychology to know that trying to skip over it wasn't a real strategy. Carter retained an attorney, a man named Goldfarb, who had a reputation for aggressive positioning. She had expected that. Frances had prepared her for it. The first move Goldfarb made was to challenge the validity of the financial freeze, arguing procedural grounds. The motion was denied. The second move was a counterclaim suggesting that Adrian had been emotionally withholding during the marriage, contributing to Carter's distance, which was the kind of argument that told her everything she needed to know about how the other side intended to proceed. Frances called her after the counterclaim came in. "How are you feeling about all this?" "I feel like he hired someone who writes fan fiction," Adrian said. Frances laughed, actually laughed. "Okay, good. We're fine." Took 11 weeks. Adrian cooperated with everything. Her records were meticulous, organized, already categorized by date and account. At one point, Goldfarb requested her personal financial records going back 7 years, which she assumed was an intimidation tactic, an implication that they'd find something. They didn't find anything. She had been, her entire professional life, exactly who she appeared to be. Carter's records were a different matter. Frances's forensic accountant found 2 LLCs that had been used to route money away from the marital estate. A strategy that might have worked if the person reviewing the documents hadn't spent 15 years catching exactly this kind of structural obscurement. They settled before the court date. She kept the house. She kept her retirement accounts fully. She received a structured payout from the marital estate that the forensic accountant had valued considerably higher than Carter's initial representation had suggested. Frances called it one of the cleaner settlements she'd managed in years. Adrian signed the final paperwork on a Thursday morning. Frances's assistant brought in coffee afterward, which Adrian thought was a strangely civilized touch. "What are you going to do now?" Frances asked. Adrian considered the question. She'd been asked it a lot lately. By Renee, by her mother, by colleagues at the firm, who had been discreet and kind in the way that people are when they sense something significant has happened. "I'm going to repaint the bedroom," she said. "It's been the same color for 4 years. I never liked it." Frances smiled. Good answer. The bedroom ended up a shade called river stone, a blue-gray that shifted in the light, lighter in the morning, almost green in the evening. She'd picked it off a sample card at the hardware store on a Sunday afternoon, standing in the paint aisle for 20 minutes longer than she needed to, because she wanted to choose something she actually liked instead of something that seemed reasonable or compromise-worthy. She did most of the painting herself. Renee came up for the weekend and helped with the trim, and they played music too loud and drank wine they'd opened before noon and made a mess of the drop cloth, and it was fine. It was more than fine. She thought sometimes about what she might have done differently. Not in a self-punishing way. She'd worked hard not to do it that way. More like an after-action review, the kind they did at work when a project had run off track. Where were the gaps? Where had she ignored data she should have acted on sooner? The data had been there for longer than 8 months. She knew that. She'd known it the way you know something in your peripheral vision. Present, registered, not quite faced. But she also knew that she had not been passive when it counted. When it counted, she had done exactly what she was trained to do. She had gathered what she needed. She had moved when she was ready. She had walked into that attorney's office with documentation that Frances still mentioned, months later, as the kind of preparation she wished every client brought. She wasn't someone who had been rescued. She was someone who had gotten herself out. There was a difference. It mattered to her that there was a difference. Carter texted once, about 4 months after the settlement. It was a Sunday evening. She'd just gotten back from a run, was sitting on the back porch with a glass of water, still catching her breath. "I know this isn't what you want to hear, but I'm sorry. I really am." She read it twice. She thought about what she might have wanted to hear a year ago. What she might have done with those words if he'd said them 8 months earlier, 12 months earlier, before she'd sat in front of a laptop with a lease agreement on the screen. She thought about the harbor boat in Charleston. The thing he'd said that she couldn't remember anymore. She put the phone down. She didn't reply. That wasn't cruelty. It was just that there was nothing in her that wanted to open that back up. Not for closure. Not for the satisfaction of having the last word. Not for any of the reasons the movies would suggest. She was tired, and the evening was warm, and the backyard looked particularly good in that light. And she had painted her bedroom a color she actually liked. And she was in her careful and complicated and ongoing way. Okay. She picked up her water glass. Listened to the neighbor's dog bark at something in the dark. She went inside and made dinner.